Aloha mai kako. Me kamahalo nui, Mānoa. This oli sets our intention today to celebrate the lands and the waters of the Pacific, to honor them and remember that our care for them and our attention to their complex interactions is what sustains us. It also sets a space of gratitude that grounds our restless minds and emotions as we confront the difficult and most important issue of our time, climate change and climate justice. Before I introduce these issues and how art can contribute by transforming our attitudes and energizing our efforts, I want to share my deep gratitude to a number of people and supporters that have made it possible to put on this exhibition and the community events and conversations that will happen around it. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Jaimey Hamilton Faris. I teach here. I teach contemporary art and critical theory. And I have brought these amazing artists here to Hawaii, here to this stage. Most everyone is able to join us today. So first, I'd like to thank the artists for being here and for all of their hard work, and for all of the emails and the inundating conversations that we've had to make this exhibition happen. It has been the conversation between all of us, I think, that has made this work so deep and so strong, and I think this is just the beginning of a conversation, and I hope we're opening it out to folks through the exhibition and through the community events that are going to happen. I want to thank especially Mary Babcock, who I had an initial conversation with her about how important it would be to bring artists here to Hawaii to have this conversation and to share their experiences of what happens on and what is happening in other islands here. So thank you for making this happen and for helping me all along the way. I also want to thank Christina Gerhardt and Adele Balderston, who've organized Eve Mosher's community art piece, The High Water Line. It's a Honolulu community walk that's happening next Saturday along with a workshop. And they've done an amazing job, so I want to acknowledge all the hard work that has gone into that project. And also special thanks to Christina for sharing another project, the Atlas of Remote Islands and Sea Level Rise, which is a book of maps and texts, and a selection of those are in the gallery. So thank you so much, Tina. Inundation will be traveling to the Big Island. Donkey Mills Art Center will be hosting this exhibition in March through June. So I really want to thank Maya Clark and Mina Ellison, who are helping to curate the show there and connect these artists to community on another island. I have so many people to thank. I also want to thank the contributors to the Inundation catalog, which is now up and online. You all have brochures in your hands, and in that brochure, there is a link to the exhibition site and QRL if you're that savvy, and you want to link to the online catalog. There are longer essays there about each of the pieces. And those essays have been written in collaboration with my Art 395 class. I worked really hard with all of my undergraduate students for this, and I am so gratified to see this next generation committed to understanding a complexity to climate change. They've been doing the emotional work of overcoming their own inundating feelings and understanding what's truly at stake and making a contribution. And I think it was really important for me to work with all of them on the catalog as well. There are contributors to the catalog: Chip Fletcher, Sean Connolly, and Kathy Jetnell Kitchener's poems for the exhibition are also in that catalog as well. Are Chip and Sean here? Chip, I saw you earlier. Okay. Along with all of those contributions, I deeply want to thank Napua Wong, who has designed the catalog and has been working with me over the course of the last few months, and she's just been amazing I've learned so much from her, and she's so generous. So she's done a wonderful job with creating the design, the graphics, and the catalog. I also can't help but thank the staff at the UH Art Gallery, all of the students who have helped put on the exhibition, who've helped install, Jake for taking photographs and doing PR, and also, of course, the exhibition designer Wayne Kawamoto and the associate gallery director Sharon Tasaka for all of their amazing and very detail-oriented care that has gone into this piece. I also want to thank gallery director Micah Pollock, who has taken on this project so enthusiastically after her arrival here at this new job. And sound and audio today is being done by Will Williams over here, and then Liam and Toffer here in front. They're going to be recording the conversation as it happens. There are also so many community members and organizations here in the audience that have brought their experience and their expertise to the fore, and they will be speaking at the public events, and I will have an opportunity to thank each and every one of them over the course of the next week. Finally, most importantly, the exhibition and events are generously sponsored by organizations and donors listed on the back of your brochure. And I want to give a special thanks to Hawaii Council for the Humanities, and in particular, Stacy Hoshino, the Hawaii State Foundation for Culture and the Arts, the Center for Pacific Island Studies, in particular, James Bernis and Tara Kabuktalaka, and Provost Michael Bruno. So beyond today's art talks, there are a number of community events happening. On Tuesday and Thursday, we're going to have a series of water talks. Those will be in 2 different locations. We have a series on Tuesday at Hokupu Center, and you can find details and RSVP links on the website, and that's the talk series up at the top corner here. We're also having a second part on Thursday here in the gallery. So I invite everyone to join us, where we are going to get a little bit deeper into issues as artists are in conversation with lawyers, scientists, community members, to really talk about how we can connect environmental issues with social issues. Beyond the water talks this week, we are also doing the community art project, the High Water Line, on Saturday. It's sold out. It's fabulously important, and I think people are recognizing that. But we will have a self-guided tour posted to the website so that anyone can do that walk. And so the links are here. And then we have more events in February, so stay tuned. Those are all on the website as well. So why are we here? To reflect upon the sensation of inundation that many of us feel, but what I want to emphasize today is that many of us feel inundation in very different ways and from different positions, with different experiences. And what I want us today to focus on also is that all of these sensations of inundation are different, but hopefully we can transform them if we can connect in a shared space to an experience or sensation of immersion, in which we are connected together and we help each other through understanding the deepest issues of climate change. We see images of climate change as watery disasters really often in the media, right? Images like these. Storms wrecking homes, roads, causing droughts. And in the news, we see them as happening elsewhere, rather than really checking in and thinking about how we ourselves are experiencing climate change, and how each and every one of our different positions around the world experiences those things differently. And art, I believe, can remind us how to really feel the climate in our gut, how to listen to our bodies interacting with our environments and each other when they tell us what is good and what is bad. Angela Tiatia, who is beyond Martha, the only artist who couldn't make it here today, she was telling me about this piece, 2 of her videos for the exhibition, and this is one, this is Lick here. And she told me, when she told me she made this piece, she wanted to make this performance about Tuvalu, because she had said she had seen so many dire films about the climate situation in this particular place. She really wanted to experience it for herself and to see what was happening in that place in more of a daily sense. The images about climate change, especially island images about climate change, have become so cliched. And so what she wanted to do was foreground a sensation where she could glimpse life as it's lived in an environment where the impacts of that change is part of an everyday experience rather than a dramatic one-off event. And she also wanted to film her own experiences in those waters. And what's so important about what she's doing is she's playing on the typical images of islanders in flooded waters, but here showing the power and the strength of her own body. Her head is out of the water, her legs are strong, her hands are guiding her and helping to position her as she stays with the water and with the tide that's going in and out around her body. So she's using the experience of the water to keep her up and buoy her. And I think that's what's so important about learning that lesson from water. So with her head above the water, she's collaborating, she's learning with it. And these experiences of being connected to the environment, I think, are now clouded with other emotions brought on by dire storytelling that tends to emphasize a singular narrative of climate disaster and a single dystopic future. And David Wallace Wells was here earlier this week. Who went to see David Wallace Wells's talk? So a few of you in the audience. He has written this book, Uninhabitable Earth, and it's just these kinds of stories, I think, that are impacting our sensation of inundation. It's based on a really left-brain, fact-based gathering logic where he uses current calculations to project a world that's hot, drowned, and full of hostility. And what I want to emphasize today is that this is only a story. And it's overwhelmingly based on a limited scope of values and attitudes. And I think the problem, as I see it with this approach, is that the narratives of fear and futility are their own dangerous feedback loops, as dangerous as the climate's tipping point. It's instilling a sense that the problem can only be solved by experts at the government and geoengineering level, and it puts most of us back in a very passive and helpless position. These narratives make really great assumptions about what kinds of solutions and what kinds of values are shared, and what kinds of worlds we want now and in the future. There's also another flaw with Wallace Wells' narrative, I think, and it's that he doesn't address the historical forces that have impelled climate change in the first place. The book doesn't really couch the present situation as already based in a past of violence, radical population displacement, and environmental degradation. If we look at the historical record, it clearly shows that carbon emissions began at the same point in time that imperial colonial systems began intensive systems of resource extraction, cultural elimination, and land appropriation. With industrialization entering the picture, this world, this 19th century and 20th world now that we live in, and its value systems have really only been around for 300 years, but it's the story that has dominated the climate change discussion. So in response to Wallace Wells, I look to activist and futurist Adrienne Marie Brown, who reminds us that there are multiple worlds. Yes, the one we've got, the one we're building, but also the ones we imagine. The basic takeaway is that we need to think about climate change in multiple frameworks on different timescales, and we need to implement what can be done now and make these choices in such a way that it also leaves open better new possibilities for more people to participate in building many possible future worlds. In the Asia-Pacific region, we're at the very heart of these intersecting worlds. Even more than that, even more worlds than brown notes. And I think we need to pay attention to designing and imagining these many possible futures by including lessons from indigenous island cultures, the people of these islands, as important knowledge holders and decision makers. So in order to do that, what I've tried to invite in this exhibition is these stories and experiences, this knowledge from very different places across the Pacific, so that we can learn some of these lessons. And so I want to, in that spirit of sharing, I want to turn over the mic to the artists who are here to share their work and some of the things that they've learned from the particular places where they live, where they've done research, and where they share experiences with people. So if I can please invite up the artists from Inundation, Charles Lim, Jake Atienza, James Jack, Mary Babcock, Joy Enomoto, and Kathy Jedno-Kitchener, and Ki'ili Chun. So I've just put, we're just going to talk about some of the pieces in the show for about 5 minutes. Are you guys all comfortable? Okay. And we're going to start with Kathy and Joy's piece. And after they all introduce their work a bit, we'll take a few questions from the audience. I'm sorry I don't have mics for folks up here, but what I would like to do is invite people to come down and use this mic for Q&A if possible. Okay? So let's start with Kathy and Joy. If you guys want to get the mic, I have an image of your piece.
I'm panicked. Okay. This is so stressful. Wow, I don't really do, I talk a lot, but I don't do this. So Kathy and I have actually been in collaboration since 2014. Kathy opened my eyes to climate change when I realized how much it impacted the Pacific. And her poetry basically changed my life. And so, as I say all the time, it changed my BFA, it changed my master's thesis, it changed my life. So, in that, I was like, when Jaimey approached us, I was like, of course, it's another opportunity for me to work with Kathy. Of course, Kathy and I are crazy busy people, and we were like, what were you thinking about when we decided to do this? But when this opportunity came up, I thought, we were thinking, how do we, in our respective places, me in Hawaii and her in the Marshalls, engage in this conversation? I've gone to the Marshalls and I've seen the reality of the ocean and the lagoons and what that means. But I was also thinking about how are we being inundated in other ways? So in this piece, it was not just thinking about climate change, but thinking about what are those things in the ocean that are those sort of harbingers of warning, right? So when I decided during, I think it was over this summer, just before everything jumped off with Mauna Kea, there was a whale stranding on Maui that was, we always do this thing of like, well, what are the causes? Let's euthanize the whale and find out. When we know it's Navy sonar. And it's almost always Navy sonar. Every time you look at whale stranding, it's Navy sonar. If it's not Navy sonar, then it's plastic in the stomach or some other toxin that's somehow connected to us, but really connected to the military almost all the time. And the fact that the Navy wants no limits to itself really kind of got to me. And I was like, you are inundating our whales and our marine mammals and our oceans with a sound that we don't want. And so in that, I was like, well, why don't I let me think about this beached whale, let me think about these beached whales and fill that with these are actually the whale is actually filled with lawsuits of NOAA on how much, even the courts are saying, really, you guys have no limits? You can cover millions of miles of oceans, but you can't figure out where, you can't do sonar in this? So even the courts were annoyed with them. And so in the whale, there's little details of how the Navy doesn't want limits on itself. And the result of that is, of course, it kills those things most sacred to us, right? And for Hawaiians, we come from Po. We are coming from this place, and the whale is that being that's between Po and the light, yeah, between the ocean and that last phase before humans, right? And what have humans done in response? So that was my thinking, my part of it and then I'll let Kathy talk a little bit about the baskets and that part of the installation.
So the baskets that were woven is called a Banino in Mānoa in Marshallese, and those were woven by community members. Some Marshallese women who are actually here, they taught the younger Marshallese high school students to weave the baskets, and it became a workshop that Joy helped facilitate and bring leaves to get together so that they can weave those Banino. The reason why I chose the Banino is because there's a legend about well, now I just heard from one of the older ladies. It was actually Lelau. Lelau was a trickster god who was carrying one of those baskets full of sand, and the sand fell between the holes of the Banino, and it created an island. And so with the whole concept of climate change happening and us actually looking at elevating islands or building islands to maintain our sovereignty, to maintain our country, to survive, this was supposed to represent that. I came at it specifically from climate change. The concept of inundation for me was connecting what was happening with the whales being inundated by sound with the ways in which we as Pacific Islanders are getting inundated with climate change, but also within these climate meetings at the COP specifically. So I just came from the COP, the Conference of the Parties, the annual climate change conference, and it was in Madrid, and it was my first time being there as a climate envoy, a technical sort of side of the government, and being in these negotiation rooms and just being inundated with all of these countries who were trying to block progress everywhere you turned. And so the poetry that I wrote about was really about kind of the what I'm grappling with within those rooms and with the issue of climate change. And so I touch on a number of different subjects in those poems as well. And so when you go into the exhibit, you hear the poems being spoken, and I'll be sharing those poems in a little bit too. Yeah, thank you.
So Charles.
Hi, I'm Charles, and I'm from Singapore. And Singapore is a country that's actually grown more than 30% by actually buying material from other places. So we are one of the countries that have expanded without war, actually quite peaceful, through land reclamation. Because we feel that we're too small and we want to get bigger, because to grow and maintain wealth. Actually, we're quite a wealthy nation. Recently, there was a movie, Crazy Rich Asians. I think it was set in Singapore. And I've done a series of works called Sea State, and in the works is I'm kind of like looking at the relationship between that Singapore has with the sea. Actually, Singapore used to be an island that used to be quite hilly, actually, and what we did was we took all our hills and we dumped it in the sea until we were left with 7 hills. And then at some point in time, there was a scientist that actually went to government of Singapore and said that you can't take any more hills because you need the hills for air defense. So what happened was that we started buying sand from like Indonesia, from like Malaysia, from like Cambodia and Myanmar. And in Indonesia, actually, we took so much sand that actually 7 islands in Indonesia actually disappeared. And Singapore grew bigger. So, and there are many cultures in Singapore. Actually, Singapore, the people that live in Singapore, they're very actually a culture that's actually very close to water. You know, if you go to the Ria Islands in Singapore, or you look at the archives in the 70s, how people live, they actually live in houses that were in the sea, you know. And you know, you have a jetty that's leading to the house. And the front of the house is actually not the part that was facing the land, it was actually facing the water. And what happens is that currently, if you go to Singapore, all of that is gone. Maybe it's because there's this law called, that we inherited from the British. It was called the Foreshores Act. And in the Foreshores Act, it says that the state has power to take away property from people actually that are living along the coast. And so what happened in the 70s, the state actually exacted this rule to the maximum, and they took away all the properties, they moved all the people that were living along the coast in Singapore, including my family actually. And we got moved into the center of Singapore. So currently, all the people that are Singaporeans were living in the center, you know, that we keep the sovereign part of Singapore. And then we have this other part of Singapore that's on the outside. And in a way, that's what I call the sea state, because that's the part that we have actually reclaimed, you know, and the land, the state has actually made that land. And I'm kind of interested in this, how do we make this land? What does this land mean to us actually? And it's quite interesting, and as me as a sailor, because I sail actually, I go out to sea and sail, and on the charts actually, when I see an area that's being reclaimed, it still has that designation of water actually. And it says now that works in progress. And in the chart, it still is colored in blue at the point in time. So it's very strange. You know, from a legal point of view, it's actually still sea. But actually, as a sailor, when I approach that area, all I see is just sand. It's actually physically is land. And what's really interesting is that the process of land reclamation is that when you reclaim a piece of land, you cannot immediately work on that land. The land is very unstable. If you build anything on it, the building will just collapse because the sand is still kind of like, the engineers call this process consolidation, where the sand needs to settle before working happens. And this can take up to like 10 or to 5 years. But if they spend a lot of money, it can be 11 months. So what happens is that we had this very odd period for like 10 years where it's neither here nor there actually. And what happens is that there's this person that's actually measuring the solidity of the land. And then when it's solid enough, the data is given to the Singapore Land Authority. And then a document is actually given to the President of Singapore. And at that moment, it's almost like state magic ritual in a sense. The President is sitting in his office, and he stamps on it and he signs on it. And at that moment, the sea is transformed into land at a very moment actually. And then if you go to the reclamation site, there's actually a fence, and the fence moves. So one side, although you see is land, it's actually sea legally, and then the other side is land. So what's happened in this project is that I'm showing one video, and in the video I'm very kind of interested in this moment where, you know, with human beings, we have this kind of like obsession that only history begins when the land pierces through the water. You know, before that, it's like the sublime or anything, you know, or romantic imaginations. But actually, there's like animals living there, and actually there's resource in there. You know, there's seagrass and things going there. So, but that space is not seen as productive space. So it's either dredged or filled with land, and that's what's happened. So what's happened is that actually I shot a lot of drone footage of this process in Singapore where we're dumping sand into the sea. And I'm very interested in this moment where the sand actually is pouring into the sea, but there's this moment where the sand actually pierces through the water. So if you watch through the videos, look out for the moment actually. And then in this other thing, it's called the sand graph. So what's happened is that actually, it's a very simple graph. The size of that's the pictures of the presidents of Singapore. And the size is according to how much land they have proclaimed, basically. And then on the other side, on the shelf, actually, there are these things called the sandpapers. Basically, what's happened is that I've collected all the proclamations and I put it in there, so you can go through them. Yeah. So yeah, that's my project. Yeah.
So Peter, if you have questions, just hold on to them and we'll be able to talk about them as soon as everyone's introduced their pieces.
Aloha mai kako. I'm Ka'ili Chun, and thank you, Jaimey, for the wonderful opportunity to exhibit in this show. This particular series is a new series. It is looking at certain areas of Oahu, and I intend to look at all of our islands in our state. But these particular horizontal images are of, right now, Waikiki, the airport area, in particular the Honolulu Reef runway, and also Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station. Each quadrant in the horizontal image represents the various different sea level rises. So the first one on the left, reading left to right, is 0 feet sea level rise, and then 3 feet, 6 feet, and 10 feet. All these areas, in terms of looking at reclamation, one can say that Waikiki is reclaimed land. Similarly, the reef runway is definitely reclamation land, and if we look at certain areas around the island, the wetlands that used to be there, the Lo'i or Loko'i'a, all these areas have the potential to come back. So it's an interesting, complicated issue that we look at, and you can see at this particular quadrant, it's a 10-foot sea level rise. And the suggestion here is to look at what could come back. How are we going to address these issues? It's a layered issue. It is something that we can look to our ancestors in how they approached managing land, which was somewhat different from how we manage land today. But there is potential to inundate our lands again in a more balanced approach. And so with these, with this particular series, I have used the GIS mapping and hope to continue the exploration around each island and look at those particular areas of port of entry, of what our modern society values in terms of capitalism and modernization. This is a little bit of where I'm going in this next body of work. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary. First want to thank Jaimey for putting together this exhibition, and he's probably not here, but I really want to thank Wayne Kawamoto for creating the magic in that space, and then also my family for supporting me through the project. So my piece for the show is named Floatic Sea, and floatic is a word that more typically is used to refer to fast-moving fresh water. And so I'm consciously juxtaposing that with another kind of watery space, which is the sea. Because for myself, I'm always trying to understand what's happening thousands and thousands of miles north and how that impacts not just the water levels, but actually the whole constitution of the seas that surround us and are part of us here. I moved here maybe 13 or so years ago, and to a space, I thought I had a pretty good education actually, but for the most part what I knew about this entire area was that it was a big empty ocean. And so part of my sense of inundation is really trying to play catch up to understand where it is I live, in what ways I'm part of this place and what ways I'm not, and in a very abstract way trying to understand the waters and the topographies and cultures of the space I now reside. It's very abstract though, because mostly how I get to know places is through maps. So in the piece I created, I started looking at the kinds of maps that I hear in our regular discourses, and they're not necessarily maps about the lands, they're maps about economics. So in my piece, if you look closely, there's two different kinds of maps overlaid on each other. One is a bunch of stitching. It looks like bubbles, like cartoon bubbles. But actually those are the representation of the EEZ, or exclusive economic zones, that surround a number of different island countries. And if you look closely enough, there's another set of mappings, which are small pin-pricked islands that seem somewhat displaced from the economic zones that now surround them. And the piece was really for me trying to explore that way in which our discourse is so profoundly sort of influenced by our concerns about the economics of what will happen with sea level rise. And thinking about the very intermingled, intertangled situation we all find ourselves in terms of the complexities of what's happened to the ecologies and its relationship to colonialism. What's most interesting to me, I think, about the work is that for me, like, art making is really a way to ask questions, and I'm inundated with not even knowing where to begin with what the questions are. But when I hung my piece, I finally figured out what the work was really about for me. And what struck me when I hung the piece in the gallery was that it really felt like the sea wants its place at the negotiating table. That it needs to be present, not as like an empty entity, but actually a living, breathing, moving, alive collaborator, and that it needs to force itself sort of forward for us to even pay really attention to it as a being. Thanks.
Hi everybody, aloha. My name is Jake. I'm one half of DAKO gamay. So my sister Martha couldn't be here with us for this exhibition, so I'm here representing both of us. This is a collaborative work that we've created for Inundation. It's called Title. Maybe just a bit about where we're from. So Martha and I, so we're siblings. We have a Dutch mother and we have a Filipino father, and we grew up in both places, both in the Netherlands and the Philippines. So our childhood sort of lies in both those places. But mostly it's on Bantayan Island in the Philippines, where our father is from, and where we continue to live. My sister's there at the moment. And the way that we started collaborating as DAKO gamay was really just because I'm the younger sibling. I'm 8 years younger, and when I was younger, I used to help my sister with her projects, holding a camera, using the second camera to help her film, bring scotch tape and bond paper to an event, those kind of things. And throughout the years, as I got older, it sort of developed into more structured collaborative efforts. Specifically in 2010, that's when we started to work together more seriously. Throughout the years, we've maintained our own practices, which is also just due to logistics. I moved to Australia in 2014, and this is when I really started having a sort of sense of the world in terms of, I guess, coming from an island, understanding what other islands go through, Australia being an island, but also Australia has other islands surrounding it. And from my perspective, I became more and more interested in sort of land and people who come from the land, relationships to the land. Whereas my sister, for the past few years, all throughout her life, really has gravitated a lot towards the ocean and has documented specifically Bantayan Island, life on Bantayan Island. And so what we're bringing to this work title is really those interests and that natural, I guess what we gravitate to naturally. In 2018, I started working on a project documenting the commodification of natural resources, and this is what brought me to Brazil, to the Kingdom of Tonga, and then back to the Philippines last year. And so what I've contributed to this project is here on the left side, you can see a screenshot from the island of Tomatapo in the Kingdom of Tonga. Here on the right is my sister's work, which is basically documenting the entire coastline of Bantayan Island. So Bantayan is also actually a group of different islands, but this is the main island of Bantayan. So it moves hopefully you'll get a chance to see it, but both of the images move very slowly. Mine with a drone, the other one with a DSLR camera around the island. So you get to see what Bantayan and Tomatapo to some extent look like. And the reason why I'm explaining that is because, of course, it's visual work, but also because when we talk about climate change and rising tides, we're also talking about human behavior to some extent, right? So that a big part of that conversation is what is human behavior? How do we interact with the land, with the ocean, and how do we manage these spaces? And so by simply documenting Bantayan and Tomatapo to some degree, we're really looking at the human behavior that we're all exercising. And part of that, depending on how deep you want to go, you're also looking at you're looking at individual behavior, but you're also looking at policy that's being made, who is able to create policy, how is land managed, and sort of these bigger questions come to the fore. And so, in a way, comparing Bantayan Island and Tomatapo, it's not a scientific approach it's not a scientific comparison, because these islands are quite different from each other, even though they may appear as similar, both being relatively small islands. But Tomatapo, if I'm not mistaken, is the biggest island in the Kingdom of Tonga. Bantayan Island is a small island in the middle of the Philippines. So that makes them very different in terms of their importance in the region, their capacity to self-govern, and so forth. And you see also the population of Bantayan Island is more or less 120,000 people. The population of the entire Kingdom of Tonga is around the same amount, around 120,000 people. So yes, there are similarities in terms of the issues that they're facing with rising tides. There's also a few distinctions which I think are very important to consider in sort of analyzing what's happening here. One of the things that they do have in common, I think, is that and I think this marks the core of the work as well, is that both places feel an urge to develop their economies. And in order to develop their economies, there has to be a certain way that land has to be managed. There has to be certain human activity that needs to be strengthened, boosted, and also one of the things that they have in common, I would say the third thing that they have in common, is that both places have very complex relationships with the outside world through institutions, financial institutions, the World Bank, international NGOs like Oxfam, Red Cross, aid and development coming from countries like China, Australia, Japan, United States, Australia, New Zealand. And so sort of looking at these videos and comparing those places from that perspective is quite important in terms of looking at what climate change means on a very structural level. What is really happening? What is it that you see? And what are the forces, or what is the framework that's allowing the situation to exist in the first place? And I would say those are the things that we're exploring with this work. Hopefully we can have a conversation about that. And so Martha and I continue to sort of delve into these topics in the coming years, I'm sure, through various iterations of both this project and our individual works.
Aloha, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's really a joy to be back on Oahu, and just thank all of you for being here to be a part of this conversation. I get quite emotional when I talk about these works. Each piece that's here has gone through a really intensive community engaged process. And just to start off with, I'd like to briefly mention just the people that have made this possible. Seabirth is a really large piece, but I myself am very small. Masayuki Tamai, diver, Soma Takahashi, artist, Takeshi Ishihara is a sound, Koki Sonoda, underwater, Fifth Dragon, Hideaki Gushken and Wakage no Itari Mura village played a very large part in every piece that's here, and I would love to share more of their messages. Leona Nishinaga is an artist who recalls a dream about her grandfather. Osamu Makishi talks about the voice of the coral, and as well as Yama ga hagin, umi ga hagin, which means that when the mountain is balding, the sea will also bald, which means that the more attention we pay to the mountains, we also take care of the seas and keep them alive. So his elderly wisdom is an important part of this work. Noah Sora Jack, up in the back, talking, as well as in the film Piko Ishihara, the child that was in the entrance shot that you saw here coming out of the sand. Tabito Nanao, musician. Keith Teo, student of mine and translator. Yukino Inamine, musician. Sanchin player, wonderful person. Akari Chibana, artist and young person who speaks in my film for herself. Monica Kim, artist and videographer. Natasha Lee, another student who translated. Georgia Chen, who created an art fund in Singapore that helped to support my work. Yuto Mori, a child that participated in my work, and Kristen Hohuyan. So these are just a few of the people that have made this possible. There's also many animals, spirits, and all kinds of other energies that made Seabirth come into the UH Gallery right now. So this is part 3 of a trilogy, so this is the last part. It starts with spirits of dead ancestors, so my own ancestors as well as Uchina or Okinawan ancestors in the sea. So just going and listening to a place where a shipwreck occurred in the 1800s was the beginning of this artwork. And slowly over the last 4 years, it's grown into right now what we're looking at, which is part 3. So very rough summary. Part 1 is kind of the past, Part 2 is World War II and kind of the present, and Part 3 points a direction for the future. So as Jaimey was conceptualizing this show, she came to visit me in Okinawa on an island called Ikejima, where I was exhibiting in an ancestral home. And we had a dialogue there, which I think really started to shape some of not the objects or the painting or the video, but the kind of heart and the core essence of Part 3, which is to start to actually paint and write the future vision that in the very right corner of the painting, you'll see something that says, Okinawa no mirai wa Okinawa ga kimeru. Okinawa chooses Okinawa's future. And so that's what this artwork is about taking the words and the visions to start making food, to making beer, making music. The piece of wood that's inside of this exhibit is home for Pidama, or home for the fire spirits, to come back to Henoko. They've been chased away by the current reclamation and the current military base which is being built. But fortunately, it's only less than 2% finished after starting since the 1960s was when the base was first supposed to move there. So now it's 2020, and it's been very unsuccessful. So these spirits are still very strong, and they're here just temporarily helping the artworks, but most importantly, they return back to the island and really empower people to continue fighting for the sea and for the land that we all future can help to preserve and protect. So yes, the painting is from far away. This is a perspective that's been chosen by Hideaki Gushiken of what he would like to show of Oroda Bay, which is one of the deepest bays that's next to the east side of Okinawa. So the dugongs, there's only one left, but they still come back to this bay, as well as the sea turtles, and those are all part of, some of them are recorded in the video that's been made through a community engaged process of showing every edit of the video back to the people who appear in it, cutting sections they don't want to be in there, adding new sections, re-recording different dreams. So the voices have been, it's been a 2-year process of working through those voices. And so everything that you see now in the gallery is what they would like to be seen by the world. So it's painting a future vision of, in the very end of the video, talks about wakachiai shakai, a society where we're able to share things and acknowledge each other rather than destroy and harm each other. So this is happening right now, it's current, and it's really strong, and I hope that through our discussion and all of our energy that happens during this exhibition, that it will continue to paint that future that we want to see, not the future that's being predicted by a lot of other information out there. That's all, thanks.
Thank you all. I am just so proud and happy and in awe of being with all of you, finally here in physical space. And so I wanted to ask if there were any questions from the audience for the artists, or if you all have questions for each other, having heard a little bit about the pieces now. I wonder if there might be an opening question to start. We just have a few minutes before Kathy shares her poetry. Yes?
I just wanted to know how important the Dutch background is addressing the Dutch are the only people that seem to be able to live below sea level.
So I think this is a question perhaps to start with for Jake. The question is, how important is your Dutch background in relationship to this issue of sea level rise?
Hi there, thanks for that question. I mean, it's very important because it's my Dutch background informs me in every sense of the word, and so does my Filipino background. So it informs the way that I approach everything in life, I guess. And so with this work, it would have the same influence. In terms of, I mean, to be very specific, of course, and first of all, I mean, I'm going to be very blunt about it. I look the way that I look. I don't look white. So when I travel to other places, no, it's true. I mean, that's very true. When I moved to Australia, nobody thought I was Dutch. It's like, oh, I'm half Filipino, I'm half Dutch. Oh, Filipino. So that's people will hear what they see. And so, but for me, I mean, it's been always informative. When I travel to different places, which is what a lot of my work has become, is to go to the Kingdom of Tonga, to go to Brazil, especially recently, and starting with moving to Australia. I think it helped me greatly to be aware of that, because as I'm somebody who needs to ask part of what I do, or who I am also, is that I'm very curious. I ask a lot of questions, but I've also learned to know when I have to be quiet and just observe and participate in that sense. The Dutch in me says, ask questions, ask questions. It's rude not to ask questions. But you know, when I met the Maori women in New Zealand, they said to me, Jake, just be quiet, just sit down, observe the elders. And I really love that too, because it reminded me of what it means when you're surrounded by elders and you just respect them in that way. But it helped me because going to different places. Sorry, I'll try to wrap it up very quickly. But going to different places like Tonga, I mean, just to put it very blank, because I'm a brown person, I guess, and that's the vocabulary that we're using nowadays. Because I'm a person of color, I get a different reaction from people than if I were to say that I would be a more Dutch-looking white person. And I think that's like the first thing that I think about when I hear your question.
So I'm just going to open up that question a little bit.
So I mean, I think this has a lot to do with race and identity, and the Dutch role of colonialism historically and those things. So those are all. That's a very complicated question, because I always think to myself, am I using my camera? Is this perpetuating what anthropology did wrong in measuring people, documenting people, and those things? And so you know, that question contributes to all of those complexities.
So the question was also about how a person's situation in a particular space, and you were addressing the Netherlands, and the knowledge that comes from being in that space could inform one's relationship to sea level rise, could inform, you know, the potential solutions for sea level rise. And I think what I'm hearing from all of you is that there are solutions from your own backgrounds, from your own places also, in which we have different cultural solutions for water coming into spaces. So the Dutch have chosen dams and dikes.
Yeah. The Dutch is very much an interventionist approach. We're going to build this, and there's great technology that has come from that. And I think maybe my focus, my initial response to your question was more about let's look at the method behind the cultural values associated with that country.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there other kinds of cultural practices and knowledge that we want to share here in addition to Dutch dike building that could be important to foreground? And I'm thinking, Keely, in particular of your pieces.
Thank you. Sure. If you take a look at Waikiki was lo'i, loko i'a. Shall we let it come back in? That is a very complicated issue because it's Waikiki. Um, but you do also have, for example, Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station. They have brought in the wetlands again. They have been a steward of these wetlands that used to exist there. Now, we're looking at the military, and we're also looking at what they've done. If you look at Kalailoa, it's trashed now. So, you know, there's this, okay, military, no access, you know, a different kind of stewardship. Waikiki, we keep bringing the sand back in from wherever because we have to figure out where to get more sand, maybe Singapore. But, you know, we're looking at areas that are being reclaimed by the ocean, by the sea, and we're also looking at, you know, we have to look at ourselves and how we're going to steward our lands and our oceans because they're interconnected, as is everything. And so, in terms of, you know, other systems, certainly, because we could have this wetland area that could function. It's still manipulated somewhat by the human hand, but it's more in balance and in tune. But how do we manage that with contemporary concerns about monetary value, you know, tourism, et cetera, So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, does anyone else want to say any quick words on that?
One thing, I mean, Charles mentioned these houses that are on top of the sea, so there's very few of them left, but my current studio is actually in Singapore, and so there's one on the Pandan River, which is, I don't know how they get by all the different government inspectors and everybody. It must be torn down, and they build it back over and over and over. But these houses are mobile architecture, so they work really well with sea level coming up and down. This is also what Hideaki Gushken is building, so this wood log here will not be built in a permanent physical structure. He doesn't own the land that he lives on, but it's a structure that can be moved quite easily, and it's slightly above the land, so it has stilts. So this is also used in Okinawa for quite some time, which is being revived by young people, building things that are not stopping the water, but are allowing water to come and go. And so a hurricane just came very recently, and one of their houses was blown down, and we said, great, you know, another opportunity. They got together, they built it with new materials in a new location. So that's something that, I mean, Singapore and Okinawa share as a connection to building houses that are in tune with the water rather than trying to barricade it out.
Yeah, and in Singapore we have these houses called kampong houses. They're actually on stilts. They're kind of raised. I think in Australia they're kind of there also. Some modern architects have created around there in the Philippines also. And what happens is that actually when there's a kind of situation where the environment changes, the whole village actually comes and all of them carry the house and they move it. So the house is not seen as a permanent, does not hold a permanent site actually. And then the other thing I find quite troubling is the word reclamation actually. You know, it's like when we do like reclamation, it's like this idea of like, oh, we're reclaiming something that's lost. But you know, in the instance of Singapore, which is very different from like okay, we bring back the whole Dutch thing. You know, it's in I think in Holland it was more like you had land that had a very long kind of foreshores actually. It was coming in and out, and there was this idea that they needed to like protect it. But in Singapore, it's literally that's the sea actually, and then you're building new. In a way, maybe you can call it like terraforming in a sense. I don't know, instead of the word reclamation.
I mean, yeah, just to add to that, I mean, it's interesting in the Netherlands, I think 70 or 50% of the country would be underwater if it wasn't for the dikes. So there's definitely a technology to be applied. But I think it's also just, if we look at the scales of different island nations, I mean, you're going to have to transform these environments to such an extent, you know, I wonder what that technology would look like. I also just think, just to play, you know, devil's advocate, it's also what are we going to do with this technology? I mean, for example, in the Philippines, you would hear fishermen actually say like, yeah, but we're not afraid of the water. we're not afraid of rising tides, we'll just move. Because that's what people have always done for different reasons. And the type of houses that people would build and still build today, to some extent, people who live on the shores and people are generally considered poor people are actually people who are still using more traditional building techniques, which is to build houses on stilts, or if not on stilts, definitely built from local material. If there's a typhoon, then they just go totally flat, but they can also just rebuild it the next day.
Yeah.
You know, so the idea of permanent settlement is also something that's a new concept. Not totally new, but that idea of that physical structure being so permanent, that's also a newer concept in some of these places. So I think, you know, if we talk about this goes beyond the Dutch, this goes, what kind of future are we designing, then these are all things that I'm really interested in knowing how that would look like.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think there was a question here. Yeah. So the question, if I could just reframe for folks in the back there, is how you all might have responded to my sense that inundation could potentially be a positive force. And I think we all came to this together. So if anyone wants to pick that up, Joy? Are you, okay.
Hi, Margaret, I see you. I think for our space in particular, I think in the Pacific, we're very exhausted by this idea of disappearing islands. And this idea that we're drowning. It's an exhaustive conversation. And we're also really tired of sort of Western answers to technology to kind of come in and give us what we already knew and know. But in our space, we were, you know, when I was thinking about the curation of the installation, I wanted a space that created conversation, that actually allowed a space where people can enter and sit and engage. So every aspect of the installation was to engage with community. The baskets that are hanging are made by people in our community right here, that are connected to the Marshalls, are connected to the rest of Micronesia, who cannot be on their lands because of climate change, who cannot be on their lands because of nuclear testing. And so when you re-engage in those conversations, you're looking at a much larger conversation, but you have to create a space that allows for conversation, right? That allows for people to come and sit. Kathy's voice coming in as poetry, you get to meditate with that. You get to feel immersed in the sort of blue light that that you feel like you're in the ocean. You get that, a different kind of inundation of what the ocean can be and what has always been for us in the Pacific. The ocean is not, it's where we come from, right? And so it's not this space that we treat as, it has now been made dangerous because of other people. Right? It is not a space that was made dangerous before. And yeah, we've always had housing that could be moved, change, that was in relationship to nature. But more than our housing, our entire cultures were in relationship to the sea, right? Which is a very different thing than this idea of like, oh no, I'm gonna lose the whole world because I can't fly, right? Right? It's like, it's an incredibly different conversation. People always treat the Pacific, like as Mary was talking about, most people think of the Pacific as some kind of passway through to Asia, right? Or to Australia, or it's like some hole in the middle, right? And my students from Guahan and from Micronesia and from the rest of the Pacific will tell you it is a very full space that is resource rich, right? And they always try to make you feel like it's empty. Right? So the goal of this conversation is opening up a much larger conversation beyond climate change. It's about how do we utilize our cultures in ways that how do we restore a conversation that has always been for us right? I'm not in conversation with people that don't have any clue about the Pacific. I'm in conversation with our communities in the Pacific, and what do we have to say to each other, right? And, you know, the reality that the Marshalls is, you know, facing, maybe they need to create an island, a man-made island, right? That's devastating for me. To know that as another Pacific person, to know that as a Hawaiian, right? I really didn't think I was gonna cry, but I cried. So when we think about what is positive, the positive is that we're having conversations with other Pacific Islanders that we haven't had for a very, very long time, right? And we even see this with Mauna Kea. Mauna Kea has opened up a conversation and a solidarity and a healing among Pacific Islanders that we haven't had in a very long time. So when we think about inundation, this sort of devastation has opened up a new unity and solidarity that I have not seen ever before. So when we think about how do we move forward in a positive way, well, this isn't the end, this may be the end of Western culture, it's a continuum for us. Okay, sorry, got a little soapboxy there,
I think that was, I'm gonna leave that answer there, that was perfect. Is there one more question? Yes. Oh, good. Come on down.
Hi, so I'm currently an undergraduate pursuing my studies here at the university, and I think with the short question, with the time crunch, if through your process there were any questions or statements or thoughts that you felt you wanted to communicate to a younger generation, people that are going to be continuing these thoughts and wanting to keep asking questions and creating dialogue of your work, in a sense. Do you guys have anything that you're just itching to communicate or to say to us, like, so that we can continue these conversations? Yeah.
I do. Let go of what you think you know. And let go of what everybody tells you is the way it is. And listen really deeply. Really, really deeply. Like, not just to the facts, but to your heart and to what you really know from your experience and what the world, not just like human world, but the world around you wants to say through you.
No one else?
Listen to your ancestors, both living and dead. They have a lot to say. And through their wisdom, you trust yourself. So when you hear something that other people might not hear, listen to those voices. And through artistic poetry, photographs, painting, all of the mediums that you see here today, you can sometimes channel those voices in ways that more people can appreciate those messages from the past. There's all kinds of wisdom that we're missing from the past. Through our education is quite, full of colonial and capitalistic, just really headed in the wrong direction, unfortunately. So listening to things that aren't in your books, things that you can only learn face to face with elders and other people in the community who aren't being represented appropriately in the media, or in, we have more and more things online, but sometimes we're missing the most important information, that you can meet people face to face and share those messages. When you hear something or you do learn something that you really think is important, share that message with the people around in your immediate communities. And it can make a change. It is making a change. You already are making changes through your studies and through your learning, your creative works. It is happening right now.
Anyone else? Okay, there will be more to share. I think as we move to the auditorium after Kathy speaks. So you can come up and ask the artists questions when you see them around, mingling around. So what I would like to do now is first of all give the artists a big hand. Thank you all. And then I'm going to invite you all to come be audience while Kathy shares the poetry.
So I wrote these poems about climate change. I wrote them trying to connect the whale and what's been happening with the situation with whales to my experiences at the COP. So just to translate for some of the women who are in the audience who are Marshallese. Yartevi John poem, may kananagan koilakailo Madrid, koilakay may ipin olive lelin, imtit kananagan climate change ilo koilakay. So may kananagan radikay may ridmit yuan eni, that jarba ayer gay, ayer, mawag nanyo, ayer gay, air yon eni, im so kit kanega eliminar Joran lawyer guy, import Joran olive lelin. Lokay the wayan gamogumogin pin, we're the only islanders in the room. You really look down on us, So I know like the difficulties of that. So I was just explaining in Marshallese to some of the elders that this is a poem connecting the difficulties of being in these negotiations rooms and how it's connected with these whales that are getting inundated. And so I represent Marshall Islands as climate envoy. This past conference was my first time being in the technical side of these negotiations and meetings. And as Pacific Islanders, we are getting inundated in these meetings a lot of times, and we're being, and it's quite a difficult space to navigate. And so this is a poem kind of reflecting on that. So this is the first one called Beached. And if the documents are true, then even the whalers avoided us. They slid past these islands, whittled without rivers from gods living in shallow trunks of knee. Whales were hunted for the simplest pleasure, a light and meat. In Greenland, Greenlandic hands offer me whale the same way I am offered turtle back home, in tradition, in ceremony. How conquerors stripped the sacred, left a soured carcass of commodity. Simple pleasures plundered and masticated. Destruction takes many forms. Persistent floods besiege us from all sides, even here in this meeting. We cross and crisscross an ocean of documents meant to charter an unfiltered future. Destruction takes the form of bolded words, decides, urges, requests. 3 abysmal sounding lines for compassion. In August, whales die in Maui without Hawaiian hands to soothe them into soft darkness. If it was a Marshallese shoreline, the beached whales would signal a chiefly death, harbingers of loss and damage, cost analysis of disemboweled paperwork. How do we decide the proper response to a room full of sharks in suits? They can smell the brown in our blood, the native in our speech. They offer thickets of false solutions, strategies without navigational aids. I spent the meeting searching for the simplest pleasures. You, a light to guide the thin meat of my paper heart. I could interpret your movements less than our enemies on all sides. Over and over, I asked you to decide your position. I urged you to reassess your motivations. I stood naked as a shoreline, requesting the simplest pleasures. Thank you, that's the first poem. So in between the poems recording, you'll hear me say decides, urges, requests. Those lines come directly from a conversation I had with a colleague at the COP, where he was telling me, someone who was way more experienced in the negotiations than I was, and he was saying those are the most like abysmal, pathetic words that they have in the Paris Treaty. And if you hear decides, urges, or requests, that those are the lines of the treaty that have been like super watered down, and so they mean nothing when you say decides, urges, requests. And so there's a lot of ways in which these bigger nations are fighting us in these meetings and these paper documents, you know, by watering down the strength of what we're asking for. They're watering down what we're asking the world to do, to change for climate change. So the second poem is called Nice Voice, and it's about these meetings again, but it's also about the KMM. So poem ini may kananagan KMM kayar. You know, ilok kaya jeberipin pujin aramid, agat jangak kajerum, they look down on us. Agilo KMM kaya we're with a lot of family, you know, and it's a lot of love and it's a lot of chaos, but it's so different. Climate change. So this is the Nice Voice. And again, it's also referencing adaptation, the fact that we're building these islands now. That's how serious it's gotten for the Marshall Islands, that we're having to consider reclamation, land reclamation, which is a really fascinating conversation to have with some of the folks here who are, you know, having to deal with that themselves in their own countries. So this is a poem called Nice Voice. When my daughter whines, I tell her, say what you want in a nice voice. My nice voice is reserved for meetings with a view, my palm outstretched saying, here are our problems. Legacies rolling out like multicolored marbles. Don't focus so much on the doom and the gloom, they keep telling us. We don't want to depress everyone. This is only our survival. We rely heavily on foreign aid, I'm instructed to say. I'm instructed to point out the need for funds, to build islands, move families from Wado to Wado, my mouth a shovel to spade the concrete with, but I am only pointing out neediness. So needy, these small, underdeveloped countries. I feel myself shrinking in the back of the taxi when a diplomat compliments me. How brave for admitting it so openly. The allure of global negotiations dulls like the back of the worn spoon. I lose myself easily in a gamay. Gamay defined as feast, as celebration. A baby's breath endures their first years, so we pack hundreds of bodies under tents, lined up for plates I pass to my cousin assembly line style. Plastic gloved hands pluck out barbecue chicken, fried fish, scoop potato salad, droplets of bop and meh. Someone yells for another container of Jaimey. The speaker warbles a keyboarded song. A child inevitably cries. Mine is dancing in the middle. The MC shouts, the children are obstructing our view. Someone wheels a grandma onto the dance floor. The dances begin. Now here is a nice celebration of survival. Thank you. The last poem is actually an old poem I wrote for the Vatican. They asked me to speak at this church conference. And my family is obviously very religious, as most Marshallese families are. However, very, very, very heavily Christian country. However, I struggle with the ways in which some parts of the world use religion in really toxic ways. So this was a poem reflecting on that. So may kananagan, Vatican, yung namin harkan Vatican, harkan tila ko ngayon TV John Paul manir, kan religion, yung about climate change, right? So, Jilarami rit kayo wala kayo walang rit kayo walang minagamin in Renana okay. So I make a nani when I put and use it for bad things basically. And so this was about, at the time I wrote this was when the children were being, there was a lot of news about the border and people and kids being locked up in cages and the border, the US border, and it was a really horrible thing and it really scared me. So I wrote a poem kind of connecting the two because I saw that a lot of the reason why there was these border issues was also related to climate change. Climate change contributes to the wars that were happening and these impacts. So this is the piece. So I just rewrote it the night before. To the organizers of this church conference, I regret to inform you that I could not deliver the poem constructed from biblical passages as requested. I must convey that my feelings on organized religion is a mess, is a nest, scavenged from many unanswered questions, an encyclical process of one-sided conversations, a wall, if you will, a border with cages constructed from papples. A 5-year-old takes the stand is headline, is scripture, is my mother's voice calling me to starch my Sunday best for church. I never could find the poetry in the Bible, though I searched between the bars, between bulletproof vests, greeting us at the border, detained for clams from the sea. Be specific, said the immigration officer. How do I know you'll leave when you say you'll leave? If I had faith in the watery logic of religious beliefs, I might still be here, believing our roots are darkness, that these floods arise from condemnation, from lack of Christian faith. Fate awaits us in boats as well. The 5-year-old that took the stand is our island with a death sentence. Run-on children will continue their search for safe harbor. We can at least agree this is a war predicated on droughts of belief. Every night I chew through the raw stalks of headlines and political hypocrisy through journalists who ask, how do you have faith? I choose so that my 5-year-old can swallow the stories I feed her, stories like the whale and the bird. An old legend of an arrogant whale who taunts a tiny bird, deems itself dominant, powerful, how this bird gathered a storm, thousands of them, fluttered across the sky, each one gulping down every drop of ocean, leaving an arrogant whale beached, forcing him to admit that yes, smallness is a state of mind, and yes, an ocean begins with a single drop, and yes, so too does faith. Thank you. I don't know if it's gonna fit because I was hating with a whale. I'm hating on a whale, Joy. I don't know if that fits. Okay, thank you. So those are the 3 pieces, and I'm just gonna close out there. The legend that I reference is obviously another old Marshallese legend. And I think that was it. So thank you all for having us, and really appreciate Joy and of course Jaimey for bringing me into this project and forcing me to write new poems because I needed to write new pieces. Thank you.